This is perhaps the most epic stout I have ever made. The journey started out this summer where I've pulled out the first stout from this 5-gallon barrel called Doomed, aged it on a bunch of coconut and turned out fantastic. It was a little bit hot at first, but given some time, it mellowed out and it's quite tasty right now. However, after that barrel was empty, it was now turned for the Black Mesa. 4 months later, came out a beer that was absolutely fantastic, and from it came 2 descendants. One is a vanilla base that was adjuncted with 10 Uganda vanilla beans that were soaked in bourbon for about 2 or 3 months before being added to the beer. Other is a pecan and coconut concoction that walks the line between barrel and beer. If I may just take a minute, I would like to talk about 5-gallon barrels because that is such a tricky subject and I've gone so wrong in so many places, and I wish I had this guidance when I was starting to brew with these barrels. So I've gone through a few barrels and I made some fantastic beers, I made some okay beers, and I made one that was absolutely horrendous. And 5-gallon barrels are tricky because they're small and they have a much higher surface area than a 55-gallon barrel, right? So instead of aging a stout in there for a year, year and a half, like you would in a big classic barrel, you could achieve the same amount of oak and bourbon in a much smaller time period due to that same surface area. So you have to make sure you're aging those beers for less, you're tasting them often. You want to make sure that you really brew a really big beer to stand up to the extra oak, the extra tannins, and also the extra booziness of the barrel. All these things work in unison to create the perfect barrel-aged beer. So let's talk about what we've made here. The recipe that I used was actually a scaled up hypothesis recipe, which is my award-winning pastry stout. It has a lot more roasted malt to stand up to the sweetness and the adjuncts and also the barrel. It does have much higher OG and higher gravity, so let's talk about that. So this stout consists of 50.5% two-row, 11.5% malted oats. I don't want to use flaked just so I wouldn't have a stuck mash. 8% pale chocolate, 8% crisp chocolate, 5.75% Briess Brown, 5.75 or 0.75 Simpsons double roasted crystal, absolutely fantastic malt, super caramely. 5.75 Honey Malt, and then 4.75 Carafa II. This is not the debittered Carafa II, this is the bitter roasty Carafa II. I really wanted to up the roasted malts here to really stand up to that big final gravity that we're going for. So I actually did substitute a whole bunch of the two-row for liquid malt extract. There's still over 40 pounds in my 15-gallon mash tun, so it's really hard to hit good extract efficiency there when the mash is so thick. So I do use a bit of extract to supplement that. However, I try to maintain and stick to these percentages as much as I can. I mashed this in at 153 degrees Fahrenheit, did a nice long mash, put this into my anvil and started to boil. However, the boil was not to last because after about 2.5 to 3 hours, my burning element on the anvil foundry got so caked that it stopped working. It showed an error. So I then had to rack my beer into 10-gallon propane burned kettle and finish the boil there. Nonetheless, this all worked out because I got a beautiful 1145 OG beer out of this brew day. In the boil, just to mention, I did add 60 IBU Loral hops, and this beer was fermented with a 2-liter starter of US-05, and then I pitched an extra packet just to go on top of that, just to make sure I had enough of a cell count, because it needs all it could get. It took a few weeks, but this beer did ferment down to 1058, which is not exactly your classic run-of-the-mill Russian Imperial Stout, kind of edging it around between that and a pastry stout. But it is backed up by 20% roasted malts, so I think we're in a good place here. Okay, well, let's get into the tasting. So here, I have the vanilla variant and coconut pecan variant. First, we're gonna go through the vanilla, and then we'll move on to the pecan. I should have really tasted these when I had them on tap, but now I have to pour 12-ounce bottles of both of them, 12% beer, so it's exciting. For the vanilla variant, we had steeped 10 individual vanilla bean pods in bourbon for 2 to 3 months. I just sliced them open to really extract all that vanilla flavor. Next time I might add the pods themselves to the keg too, discarding them, not just the tincture. Maybe bring out some of those more unique qualities of Uganda and what makes it different. So nonetheless, I really associate Ugandan with like sugar cookie type vibe, maybe like chocolate chip cookies. So let's get into this. Tons of vanilla. As soon as you're pouring this beer, you're getting that vanilla right away. I mean, 10 beans for 2 gallons is a good amount, and then extracting them with bourbon for a couple of months, it just amplifies that flavor. It really makes it come through, because beer on its own is not really a good extractor of the flavor, in my opinion. So I went with the extract mode. Oh my gosh, it's just all vanilla. Sugar cookies. Let's go in for a taste. Really interesting. So to start, it's this like chocolatey cookie vibe going on, but it really finishes with a strong bourbon flavor. I would say the adjuncts of stout and the barrel are really balanced in this one. That's pretty good. Not much head though. Most of my other barrel-aged stouts did have a good deal of head on them. I'm not sure where I went wrong here, so if you got any tips, let me know. Oh, molasses. Got some raisin and fig flavor going on in there. Mostly dealing with the barrel. That's what I associate a lot of those oaky flavors with. A little bit of oxidative flavor in there. Really brings out that barrel. So that's pretty good. I think the vanilla still dances with it, because you have this wave of chocolate, then you get a bit of barrel with the raisin and figs, and it really finishes out with the bourbon, and then the vanilla lingers. Oh, it's a really kind of cohesive beer, so to say. I think that adjunct worked well. Very nice. Okay, moving on. So next up, we have our main event here, which is a coconut pecan variation of this beer. Here it is. Again, not much head. Usually working with coconut and adjuncts, nuts do kill some of the head, but usually I've had pretty good experience with using pecans and coconut. Most of my lower ABV beers still have a good deal of head on them, despite coffee additions, vanilla, coconut, nuts. Nonetheless, pretty dark black. I mean, 20% roasted malt is this beer is as dark as it gets. There's no light coming through. Let's go in for the aroma. I'm getting that coconut. I don't think I would, but 3 pounds for 2 gallons of coconut will make the coconut come out a little bit. That's like a boozy, sweet coconut is what I'm getting for the aroma. Let's go in for the flavor. Wow, that is so much sweeter than the vanilla variant. It's crazy. The sweetness that the coconut adds, and a little pecan on the end there. Holy crap. Wow. Coconut, a little bit of oak, a little bit of pecan. I'm kind of getting them all. Although the bourbon, I would say, is missing a little bit. I think it's a fine balance. You either add a bunch of adjuncts and have the coconut pecan really come through, or you go lower in the adjuncts and go for the overall more rounded chocolate flavor, but you still have the bourbon there, right? So it's somewhere in the middle is a perfect balance. I would say it's as close as I could get to the balance realistically, but I do like the coconut pecan. They create this kind of chocolate ganache type flavor, or like a chocolate truffle, like a pecan truffle almost. I'm getting all of that from a combination of all those adjuncts. And that's why I think adjuncts bring to a beer like this. They're more than the sum of its parts, right? That's what we're going after here. We're not just going for coconut and then pecan and then bourbon. I mean, sure, that's nice, but it's like sometimes these beers bring all these adjuncts together and make the flavors meld together, and they go together and they create something more than the sum of its parts, right? So this beer in particular, I'm getting a lot of that chocolate ganache and chocolate truffle, which is amazing. It's pecan in the beginning, and then finishes with coconut and a little bit of oakiness. Sure, the bourbon isn't in your face, and honestly, it's kind of lost in there. You do get some oak, but bourbon itself is it's tricky to balance in a situation, right? Closing thoughts. I don't know what I would do to improve this beer. I do like the adjuncts coconut and pecan more than the vanilla. Although it's an awesome vanilla beer, I do want to keep experimenting with vanilla and trying to get close to 3 Floyd's Marshmallow Hangi. I think I'm going to try some Mexican vanilla beans and actually put the pods into the beer just to see how much the vanilla pods flavor actually add to the overall flavor. Extract is nice, but I think it's may not be getting everything out of the vanilla beans. So I do prefer the coconut pecan. Probably because I spend a lot of time baking all these things and roasting them, but it is a more well-rounded beer, and the adjuncts really complement each other and the beer base itself and the barrel. Hopefully you guys get to experiment with some 5-gallon barrels. I've not been able to replicate the results with oak staves on their own and the bourbon. They just haven't quite worked the same for me, at least from what I've tried. But 5-gallon barrels are so much fun. You can easily get 2 amazing beers out of them, and then maybe you could do like a wild mixed fermentation beer at the end of that stint too. So 5-gallon barrels, cannot recommend enough. Closing thoughts. Thanks for tuning in, and see you guys in the next video. Cheers.